Father Michael O'Connor traced the faded lines of the St. Mary's sign, a relic of late 19th century craftsmanship, as his sedan crunched onto the gravel lot. The church stood at the town's edge in rural Pennsylvania, a stone sentinel weathered by generations of forgotten seasons. Its Gothic spires, once proud, now seemed to hunch against the perpetually overcast sky, like an old man burdened by unspoken grief. He'd heard the whispers in the diocese, the veiled warnings about this assignment. "St. Mary's isn't for prayer, Father," Bishop Thompson had mused, his eyes distant, "but for keeping." Michael, a theologian whose intellect had often outpaced his faith, had dismissed it as local superstition, a quaint quirk of a bygone era. His skepticism was a shield, forged in countless hours of academic debate, designed to ward off the irrational. His first night in the rectory was punctuated by the unsettling silence of the countryside, a stark contrast to the city's endless hum.
Just as sleep began to claim him, a deep, resonant clang tore through the stillness. 3 sharp, metallic tolls, heavy with an almost mournful weight, echoed across the sleepy town. Michael sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. He checked his watch, 3:17 a.m. An old clock, he reasoned. The mechanism must have jammed, then released. He tried to rationalize, to find a logical fault in the ancient machinery, but a chill, unrelated to the crisp night air, had settled in his bones. He rose, drew the curtain, but saw nothing but the dense darkness swallowing the church's silhouette. The following morning, the reality of his new parish began to unfold. The air inside St. Mary's was thick with the scent of old stone, dust, and something else, a faint, almost metallic tang he couldn't place. As he walked the nave, preparing for his first service, he noticed it. The statue of the Blessed Mother, usually serene, now wept.
Not tears of water, but a viscous, inky black liquid that streamed from her porcelain eyes, staining her pale cheeks. It was on St. Jude, too, and a small, forgotten angel near the altar. Michael knelt, touching a finger to the dark trail. It was cool, slightly oily. Pranksters, he thought. Teenagers with too much time and paint, trying to unnerve the new priest. He'd seen worse in the city. He sighed, pulling a handkerchief to clean the defilement, a faint tremor in his hand he chose to ignore. He was interrupted by the rustle of a tweed jacket and the scent of lavender and mothballs. Agnes, the church caretaker, a woman whose face was a roadmap of quiet sorrows and unspoken histories, stood observing him from the shadows of a confessional. Her eyes, the color of faded denim, held a knowing glint that sent another tremor through Michael. She had been at St. Mary's for over 40 years, a silent guardian of its stones and secrets. "They always start with the weeping, Father," she said, her voice a dry whisper that seemed to absorb the light. She offered no further explanation, no advice, just a cryptic statement before she turned and shuffled away, leaving Michael alone with the weeping statues and the unsettling weight of her words. The strangeness escalated rapidly. Emily Carter, a bright-eyed 14-year-old with a shy smile, was one of the first parishioners Michael formally met. She lived with her devout grandmother, having lost her mother 2 years prior, and her youthful vulnerability tugged at Michael's typically guarded heart. Emily was quiet, articulate, and seemed perfectly normal, until Sunday service. Midway through the homily, her eyes, usually downcast, snapped open, wide and unfocused. A guttural sound ripped from her throat, a language Michael instantly recognized as ancient Latin, though twisted and corrupted.
It wasn't liturgical Latin, he knew, but something far older, laced with a chilling authority. Words that spoke of damnation and primal fear. Emily, he knew, had never studied Latin. Her grandmother, beside her, grew pale, her rosary beads clattering against the pew as she clutched them tighter. Over the next few days, Emily's condition worsened. She would alternate between moments of lucidity and these terrifying episodes, her voice shifting, the ancient tongue spilling from her lips, sometimes in a whisper, sometimes in a roar. The doctors offered no answers, diagnosing everything from dissociative disorder to stress-induced psychosis, yet nothing they prescribed seemed to touch the core of her affliction. Michael, ever the pragmatist, sought every medical and psychological explanation, but each avenue led to a dead end. His theological skepticism, once a bedrock, began to show hairline fractures under the relentless assault of the inexplicable.
The weeping statues, the tolling bell, Agnes's unsettling pronouncements, they all coalesced around Emily's plight, forming a pattern too disturbing to ignore. He visited Emily in her grandmother's small, neat house, where the air felt heavy with unspoken dread. The grandmother, tears streaming, begged him to pray, to intervene. Michael, despite his inner turmoil, agreed. He knelt beside Emily's bed, his mind struggling to reconcile the girl before him, frail, convulsing, speaking words that defied her upbringing, with his rational worldview. He held his crucifix, its cool metal a small comfort against his palm, and began to recite the rites of exorcism, a desperate, almost academic exercise he had learned, but never expected to employ. His voice, though trembling, gained strength with each phrase, a quiet defiance against the encroaching darkness. As his prayers reached a crescendo, Emily's body stilled, her eyes, still wide and empty, fixed on Michael.
A slow, chilling smile stretched across her face, not her own, but something ancient and malicious. The room grew impossibly cold, and the air seemed to thicken, pressing down on Michael. Then, in a voice that was clearly Emily's, yet imbued with a profound, terrifying resonance that was not, she whispered, the words barely audible, yet vibrating with an unholy power that echoed in the silence of the room. "You stand upon my tomb." The air rushed from Michael's lungs, and he staggered back, his crucifix falling to the floor with a dull thud. His skepticism, once his greatest strength, shattered into a million pieces, leaving him utterly exposed to the raw, terrifying truth of what he faced. The whispered words, "You stand upon my tomb," echoed in Father Michael's ears, stripping away the last vestiges of his theological skepticism. It was a cold, brutal clarity that settled over him, heavier than any doubt he had ever harbored.
He stumbled backward from Emily's bedside, the fallen crucifix a stark, metallic punctuation mark to the terror that had just unfolded. The room, moments before a picture of quiet suffering, now throbbed with an unseen malevolence. Emily's grandmother rushed to his side, her frail hands trembling as she helped him up, her eyes wide with a shared, unspoken dread. Michael could only nod numbly, his throat tight, his mind a frantic scramble of prayers and forbidden thoughts. He mumbled an apology, a promise to return, and practically fled the house. The crisp night air did little to clear the suffocating sense of impending doom that clung to him. His legs carried him instinctively back to St. Mary's, the silhouette of its spires a lumen question mark against the bruised sky. He pushed open the heavy oak doors, the groan of the ancient hinges sounding like a mournful sigh.
The church was dark, save for the sliver of moonlight filtering through a stained glass window, casting elongated, distorted shadows across the nave. He walked to the altar, his steps echoing hollowly in the vast space. Emily's words replayed, a relentless drumbeat in his skull. "You stand upon my tomb." He looked down at the flagstone floor, the familiar patterns suddenly ominous. Was it here, beneath the sacred space, beneath the very heart of the church? He ran his hands over the cold stone, feeling for a seam, a subtle shift, anything to betray a hidden entrance. There was nothing outwardly visible, just a smooth, unyielding surface that had borne witness to generations of prayers, baptisms, and eulogies. But he felt a distinct chill emanating from a particular section, a draft that defied the sealed environment, a cold breath from below.
He spent the next hour poring over dusty church archives, parish records, and construction plans, hoping to find some mention of a crypt beneath the altar. There were records of burials in the churchyard, but nothing of a tomb or even a basement directly beneath the main structure. It was as if that specific area had been deliberately erased from the official history. The silence in the documents was more deafening than any noise. The pieces, though scattered, were beginning to form a terrifying mosaic. The whispers of the locals, Agnes's unsettling pronouncements, the inexplicable phenomena, and now Emily's chilling revelation. He found Agnes in the vestry, meticulously polishing a chalice, her back to him. The faint scent of lavender and old wood smoke hung in the air around her. She didn't look up as he entered, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were a living part of the church's ancient mechanisms. Michael's voice was hoarse, strained.
"Agnes," he began, the name a plea rather than a command. "What is beneath this church? What did Emily mean?" She paused, the polishing cloth still. Her shoulders, usually hunched, seemed to stiffen. She slowly turned, her faded denim eyes meeting his, and for the first time, Michael saw not just quiet sorrow, but a deep, ingrained fear that had resided within her for decades. "It's not for me to say, Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic creak of the old building. "Some things are better left buried." "No," Michael insisted, his voice gaining strength, his priestly authority returning, albeit laced with a new, urgent desperation. "Emily is suffering. The church is changed. The bells, the statues. Something is happening, and you know what it is. You said St. Mary's isn't for prayer, but for keeping. Keeping what, Agnes? Keeping whom?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Tell me about the basement. Tell me about 1926.
Agnes visibly flinched at the year. Her resolve, carefully constructed over 80 years, began to crumble under the weight of his directness and the raw fear in his eyes. She set the chalice down with a soft clang, her hands trembling. She looked around as if checking for unseen listeners before finally meeting his gaze, a profound weariness etched onto her ancient face. "It's not a basement for storage, Father," she finally confessed, her voice a brittle whisper, her words casting of dust and forbidden knowledge. "It's a prison, an old, forgotten prison." She began to recount the tale, her voice growing stronger as she pulled from the depths of her memory, her gaze fixed on a distant point, as if watching the events unfold once more. In 1926, there was an incident, not an accident as they tried to call it, a possession, but not of one person, Father. It was a collective. It spread through the town like a plague, infecting souls, twisting minds.
The bishop, in desperation, authorized a ritual, a forbidden one, a collective exorcism, but with a different aim, not to cast out, but to contain. She paused, her breath catching. They trapped it, the thing, not in a person, but in the very earth, beneath the church, in the stone cellar. Her eyes, when they finally met his again, were filled with a profound sorrow. 3 priests died that night, Father, right there in the basement. Their hearts gave out, and one went mad. He spent the rest of his days muttering Latin in a padded cell. The ritual worked, but at a terrible cost. They sealed the basement, not with a simple door, but with sacred relics embedded in the walls, and a powerful curse woven into the very mortar. No one was ever to step foot down there again. It was meant to hold forever. She wrung her hands, her gaze dropping to the floor. But the seal, Father Michael, it's weakening. It's been weakening for a long time, and now it wants out.
The silence that followed Agnes's confession was heavier than the stones of St. Mary's itself. Michael felt a chilling wave wash over him, a dread so profound it stole his breath. The forbidden ritual, the deaths of 3 priests, the madness of another, the seals and curses, it was a tale plucked from the darkest corners of medieval lore, not from the quiet history of a small Pennsylvanian town. Yet the raw fear in Agnes's eyes, the conviction in her trembling voice, made it terrifyingly real. It explained everything. The locals' whispers, the abnormal phenomena, Emily's possession, and the whispered phrase, "You stand upon my tomb." "Why now, Agnes?" Michael asked, his voice a strained whisper, struggling to process the enormity of her revelation. "Why is it weakening now?" Agnes's gaze drifted to the weeping statue of the Virgin Mary, visible through the vestry door. "The world outside, it's changed, Father. Less faith, more doubt."
The prayers here, they used to be a shield, a constant reinforcement. But now, people come less. They pray with less conviction. Faith is not as strong as it once was. And doubt, Father, doubt is a solvent. It erodes. It weakens the very foundations of belief. And with it, the seals. The entity feeds on it, I think. Her voice dropped to an almost inaudible murmur. It started with whispers, faint at first, then the bells, the weeping. It's testing the barrier, and now it has found a way to reach out. "Emily," Michael breathed, the connection snapping into place with horrifying clarity. It's reaching out through Emily. Agnes nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She's pure, Father, innocent, a vessel easily swayed, easily corrupted, if not by malice, then by terror. It needs a soul, a baptized soul, to fully escape. Emily is the key." The weight of this revelation pressed down on Michael, a suffocating burden.
His rational mind, once so robust, was now completely overwhelmed. He, the skeptical theologian, was being asked to confront a literal demon trapped beneath his own church, reaching out through a 14-year-old girl. He felt a sudden, dizzying sense of inadequacy, a terrifying awareness of his own spiritual unpreparedness. He had always believed in God, yes, but in a measured, intellectual way, not with the visceral, unshakable conviction that this moment demanded. "Show me," Michael said, his voice firming, a desperate resolve replacing his initial shock. "Show me where the entrance is. Show me the seals." Agnes hesitated, her eyes wide with apprehension. "No one is to go down there, Father. That was the command, the curse." "Agnes, Emily is dying," Michael countered, his voice rising,
a tremor of frustration and fear running through it. If this thing needs her, if it's weakening, then we must understand it. We must fight it. Tell me where.
Reluctantly, slowly, Agnes led him to a discreet corner of the church, near the back wall, almost hidden behind a forgotten pew. There, on the cold stone floor, almost imperceptible unless one knew where to look, was a faint outline, barely visible beneath decades of grime and the polished wear of countless footsteps. It was a square, perhaps 6 feet by 6 feet, a section of the floor that seemed subtly different, its edges almost perfectly straight and like the natural variations of the surrounding flagstones. In the center, a deeply carved cross, almost worn smooth, was just visible. "This is it," Agnes whispered, her hand hovering over the spot as if afraid to touch it. "The entrance. The seals are within the walls, but this is the mouth of its prison. It's been covered with layers of stone, consecrated earth, and iron bands beneath the floor. But the energy, I can feel it humming, even after all these years." Michael knelt, pressing his palm against the stone.
It was colder here, much colder. A biting chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. He felt a faint vibration, a low, almost inaudible thrumming, as if a great, dark engine hummed endlessly below. He could almost hear the whispers that Agnes had mentioned, faint tendrils of sound that brushed against the edge of his perception, planting seeds of doubt and fear. He knew, with a certainty that transcended reason, that the source of Emily's suffering, and perhaps the church's unspoken anguish, lay directly beneath his hand. He knew he couldn't face this alone. His theological training, his academic skepticism, even his priestly vows felt inadequate. He needed help, real help, not from the diocese, who would dismiss this as delusion, but from someone who understood the true nature of this darkness. A name long associated with controversy and whispered scandals in the Vatican surfaced in his mind. Father Thomas Hale.
The very priest who had been forbidden from performing exorcisms after a devastating failure. The one, Michael suddenly realized, who had been there in 1926. Agnes, as if reading his thoughts, looked up, her eyes wide with a new, profound terror. "You're thinking of him, aren't you, Father? Father Hale. He was the one who went mad, they said. The one who survived, but lost his mind." "No," Michael corrected, a desperate hope beginning to stir within him. "You said one went mad. You didn't say it was Hale. Is he still alive, Agnes? Do you know?" Agnes closed her eyes, a lifetime of secrets battling with a desperate need for salvation. "He lives, or existed at least, in a quiet monastery in New England, self-exiled. The Vatican silenced him, broke him. But he was there, Father. He saw it all. He was the only one who truly understood what they had done, what they had trapped, and what it truly was. A name, a lead. It was a fragile thread, but it was something."
Michael knew with a chilling certainty that he had to find Father Thomas Hale. He was the only link to the past, the only one who might possess the knowledge and the terrible wisdom to confront the entity below. The bell tolled then, 3 deep, mournful clangs, precisely at 3:17 a.m. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a summons, a challenge. The demon below was aware, and it was watching. The call to the remote New England monastery was met with silence, then a weary sigh from the abbot. Father Thomas Hale, he confirmed, was indeed there, living a secluded life of penance, his mind still haunted by shadows Michael couldn't begin to fathom. The abbot was reluctant, almost dismissive, hinting at a past too dark to unearth. But Michael, armed with the terrifying reality of Emily's plight and Agnes's revelations, pressed with an urgency born of fear and a newfound, desperate faith. He spoke of the weeping statues, the ancient Latin, the sealed basement, and Emily's chilling whisper.
The abbot, after a long pause, agreed to convey the message, though with a distinct lack of hope in his voice. The wait was agonizing. Each passing hour felt like a minute stolen from Emily's deteriorating life. The phenomena at St. Mary's intensified. The black tears from the statues flowed more freely, staining the marble and wood with their oily residue. The bells chimed nightly at 3:17 a.m., their 3 tolls no longer a shock, but a chilling confirmation of the presence below. Emily's episodes grew more frequent and violent. She would lash out, her small frame imbued with unnatural strength, her voice a terrifying cacophony of ancient Latin and the guttural snarls of something inhuman. When Michael visited, she would writhe on her bed, her eyes sometimes flickering with a momentary flash of her own fear before the darkness consumed them again. Each time he felt the oppressive weight of the entity, its presence growing stronger, its whispers louder, insidious tendrils of doubt weaving through his own mind, questioning his purpose, his faith, his very sanity. Then, a week later, a return call. Father Thomas Hale would come. A single short sentence relayed by the abbot, devoid of emotion. Yet it was a lifeline for Michael. Relief, sharp and painful, flooded him, quickly followed by a renewed wave of dread. What horrors would this man bring with him? What terrible knowledge would he unleash? Father Thomas Hale arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a spectral figure emerging from a taxi that looked out of place against the ancient church. He was an old man, stooped and frail, his once sharp features now softened by time and profound suffering. His eyes, however, were still piercing, the color of a stormy sea, and in their depths Michael saw not madness, but an immense, unwavering sadness.
He carried no luggage, only a worn leather satchel clutched tightly in one hand. His cassock, though clean, seemed to hang loosely on his skeletal frame, as if he had wasted away from within. Agnes met him at the door, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, fear, respect, and a profound shared sorrow. She inclined her head, a silent acknowledgement of their intertwined pasts. Father Hale merely nodded, his gaze sweeping over the church with a knowing intensity that sent shivers down Michael's spine. His eyes settled on the weeping statues, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "It has grown stronger," he murmured, his voice raspy, like dry leaves scuttling across stone. "The doubt, it feeds it. Always." Michael led Father Hale to the small marked section of the floor, the sealed entrance to the basement. Father Hale knelt without hesitation, placing his hand on the cold stone, much as Michael had done. He closed his eyes, his face contorting in an expression of intense concentration, as if listening to something far beyond the range of human hearing. Michael could almost feel the presence below intensify, a tangible pressure in the air. After a long moment, Father Hale slowly rose, his gaze now fixed on Michael. "It is Ariel," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of surprise. "Not of heaven, nor of hell, but the threshold between. It was always a whispersmith, not a screamer. It sows doubt, unravels faith, turns the faithful against their Lord. It makes prayer meaningless. It revels in the decay of the soul, not its violent destruction. His words, delivered with a chilling familiarity, were a stark confirmation of Michael's worst fears, echoing precisely the information the initial requirements had laid out for the demon. "It needs a child's soul," Hale continued, his eyes unwavering. "A baptized child, to fully manifest, to cross the threshold."
Emily is not merely a key, Father. She is a sacrifice, a final offering to sever the last ties and open its prison completely. Michael's blood ran cold. The magnitude of the danger, the calculated malice of the entity was now terrifyingly clear. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The Vatican, they forbade you." Father Hale offered a ghost of a smile, grim and weary. "The Vatican forbade me from performing an exorcism, Father, but I am here, and I will help you. We have no choice. The seals are failing. The church is a prison, but it is also the battlefield, and we must descend into the pit to fight." His gaze hardened, a flicker of the old fire returning to his eyes. "We must go into the basement, where it truly lies." Agnes gasped, a choked sound of protest. "Father, the curse, the 3 priests, you saw what happened." Hale turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "I saw, Agnes, and I carry the burden of that sight every day."
But what is the alternative? Let it break free? Let it consume Emily and then perhaps others? The curse was to keep it in, yes, but if it is breaking out, then we must meet it where it is strongest. We must force it back. He turned back to Michael, his resolve clear. We must prepare for the ritual, the true ancient ritual, and we must do it quickly, before Emily is lost forever. The air in the church seemed to thicken, pressing down on them, as if the very stones were holding their breath, waiting for the coming confrontation. The preparations for the descent were fraught with a silent, oppressive dread. Father Hale, despite his age and infirmity, moved with a focused intensity, his instructions precise and unyielding. He had Michael gather ancient texts long forgotten in the rectory's dusty archives, specific prayers, litanies, and incantations in archaic Latin, some marked with annotations in a shaky, anachronistic hand that Michael suspected was Hale's own.
He also requested an array of sacramental items, holy water blessed with a specific, powerful rite, a monstrance, a thurible for incense, and several crucifixes, each imbued with particular blessings. Agnes, her face etched with a familiar sorrow, helped Michael, her hands trembling as she laid out the items, her every movement betraying the deep fear that gnawed at her. "We must purify the area as much as possible," Father Hale explained, his voice low and solemn. "Though below, it is its domain. Above, it merely touches. Down there, it breathes." He instructed Michael on the precise placement of blessed salt, how to draw protective sigils with consecrated oil, and the importance of a ceaseless litany of prayers. "Its power is in doubt, Father," Hale reiterated, his gaze fixed on Michael. "It seeks to unravel your faith, to make your prayers meaningless. You must hold strong. Every flicker of doubt is fuel for its fire."
Michael, though still grappling with the full implications of what he was about to face, found a strange nascent strength within himself. His intellectual understanding of theology was giving way to a raw, visceral faith, born of terror
and a desperate need to save Emily. He remembered his former skepticism, now a distant, almost naive memory, a luxurious indulgence he could no longer afford. He studied the ancient texts, practicing the pronunciations, trying to internalize the meaning of each powerful phrase, knowing that his conviction, not just his words, would be his only weapon. Just before they were to begin, Father Hale insisted on visiting Emily one last time. They found her in a state of violent agitation, restrained to her bed, her grandmother weeping silently in the corner. Emily's eyes were completely black, devoid of pupils or iris, and her small body contorted in impossible ways, her limbs bending at unnatural angles.
The air in the room was cold, stagnant, heavy with a palpable sense of evil. As Michael and Hale entered, Emily began to shriek, a cacophony of ancient Latin curses and blasphemies that chilled them to the bone. "Ariel! Ariel!" she rasped, her voice a chorus of unseen entities. "He comes, the Old One. He knows my name." Then her gaze, or rather Ariel's gaze, fixed on Father Hale. "You failed once, old man. You locked me away, but you could not break me. You will fail again, and this time I will not be contained. The child is mine." Father Hale remained unperturbed, his face a mask of grim determination. He approached Emily, his hand holding a small silver crucifix. As he pressed it against her forehead, her body arched violently, a guttural roar erupting from her. But Hale held firm, his eyes locked on hers, his lips moving in a silent prayer. The air crackled with a dark energy, the very fabric of the room seeming to warp under the pressure.
"We are coming for you, Ariel," Hale declared, his voice cutting through the demonic shrieks. "We will cast you back. You will not have this child." Emily's body went limp, a sudden, almost frightening silence falling over the room. Her eyes, though still black, seemed to hold a flicker of something new, a deep, almost primal terror that belonged not to Ariel, but to Emily herself. It was a momentary breach in the demonic facade, a glimpse of the imprisoned soul, a silent plea for help. Michael felt a surge of resolve. They had to act, now. They returned to St. Mary's, the air heavy with unspoken urgency. Agnes had prepared the final steps. The secret entrance to the basement, Michael realized, was not simply a section of floor to be lifted. It was a carefully disguised trapdoor, heavy and made of ancient oak, reinforced with iron bands, hidden beneath the flagstones.
It took all but them, Michael, Father Hale, and Agnes, to pry open the ancient mechanism, revealing a dark, yawning abyss below. As the trapdoor groaned open, a wave of frigid air laden with the stench of decay, sulfur, and something indescribably ancient rushed up from the depths. It was a cold that seemed to seep into the very marrow of their bones, a tangible evil that sought to extinguish all warmth, all hope. Below, a narrow, winding staircase of rough-hewn stone disappeared into an impenetrable darkness. The air thrummed with the insidious whispers, louder now, almost coherent, planting seeds of fear, doubt, and despair directly into their minds. Michael felt his knees buckle, a wave of nausea washing over him. The darkness seemed to beckon, to promise endless torment. He looked at Father Hale, whose face was grim but resolute. "Are you ready, Father Michael?" Hale asked, his voice steady,
despite the tremors in the air. This is where the true battle begins.
The threshold. Once we cross, there is no turning back. Michael took a deep breath, clutching his crucifix, feeling the cool metal against his sweating palm. He looked at Agnes, her face pale with terror, but her eyes holding a desperate hope. He thought of Emily, her innocent soul trapped in that demonic prison. He was no longer the skeptical theologian, but a priest, a warrior of faith, facing a darkness he had once dismissed as myth. "I am ready, Father," he said, his voice surprisingly firm, the words a silent prayer, a desperate plea for strength. With a shared glance, a silent acknowledgement of the terrifying journey ahead, they began their descent into the suffocating darkness of the sealed basement, into the very heart of Ariel's ancient prison. The whispers grew louder, more menacing, a chorus of unseen voices promising their damnation.
The descent into the St. Mary's basement was a plunge into utter darkness, a journey into a realm where the very air seemed to press in, thick and suffocating. The stone steps, worn smooth by time and unseen forces, spiraled downward, each step echoing with the malevolent whispers that now formed a constant, insidious hum. Michael clung to the rough-hewn wall, his hand clutching a lit lantern that cast only a meager circle of flickering light, barely piercing the abyssal gloom. Father Hale, despite his age, moved with a surprising steadiness, a seasoned veteran walking into a familiar battleground. Agnes, however, remained above, a silhouette framed by the faint light from the church, her face a mask of horrified despair, as if watching them walk to their doom. As they reached the bottom, the space opened into a low-ceilinged chamber, carved from solid rock. The air was heavy, stagnant, imbued with a palpable sense of ancient evil.
The whispers here were no longer faint suggestions, but distinct, multi-layered voices that slithered into Michael's mind, questioning his worth, resurrecting his past doubts, reminding him of every failure, every moment of weakness. "You are a fool, Michael," one voice hissed, sounding uncannily like his own inner critic. "Your God has abandoned you. Your faith is a lie." The chamber was circular, its rough stone walls pockmarked with dark stains that looked suspiciously like ancient dried blood. In the center of the room, on the dirt floor, a roughly carved pentagram was visible, its lines almost worn away, but still discernible, hinting at the forbidden ritual that had taken place decades ago. Around the room, barely visible in the lantern light, were strange carvings, symbols that defied any known ecclesiastical script, radiating an arcane power that made Michael's skin crawl. "This is where they did it." Father Hale's voice was a low growl, cutting through the demonic chorus.
"Where they bound Ariel, not to a vessel, but to the earth itself. The seals were meant to be eternal, forged in the faith of the 3 priests who died. But their sacrifice, though noble, was not enough to bind one such as Ariel indefinitely." He pointed to a section of the wall where the stones seemed to glow faintly, radiating a cold, dark energy. "That is the anchor, the core of its prison." Michael looked around, feeling the immense presence of the entity, a suffocating weight that pressed down on his chest. It was not a physical being, but an overwhelming force, a consciousness of pure, distilled malevolence, ancient and calculating. He could feel its awareness, its joy at their presence, its hunger for their souls.
He heard Emily's voice too, faint and distorted, mixed in with the demonic whispers, a plea for release.
Father Hale began to move with purpose, placing the blessed salt in intricate patterns around the pentagram, anointing the walls with consecrated oil, and setting up the thurible. He handed Michael a large silver crucifix. "Hold this, Father, and do not falter. Repeat the litanies after me. Your voice, your faith are crucial." As Hale began the ancient ritual, his voice, though raspy, resonated with a powerful authority, the Latin prayers echoing against the stone walls, momentarily pushing back the oppressive whispers. Michael, clutching his crucifix, joined him, his own voice gaining strength with each word, fighting against the creeping tendrils of doubt that Ariel relentlessly wove into his mind. He felt a profound sense of communion with the old priest, a shared purpose that transcended their individual fears. Then the phenomena began.
The single lantern they had brought flickered wildly, the flame almost extinguishing, plunging them into near total darkness before flaring back to life with a defiant hiss. Shadows stretched and danced on the walls, contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock their efforts. The whispers intensified, becoming a roar of unholy sound, a direct assault on their sanity. Michael recited a powerful prayer, his gaze fixed on the glowing anchor in the wall. As he spoke, the ancient crucifixes embedded in the rough-hewn stone walls, relics of the original binding ritual, began to twist. Slowly, agonizingly, they rotated until their upright forms were inverted, their arms pointing downward, a blasphemous mockery of their sacred purpose. Michael gasped, but Father Hale's eyes remained fixed, unwavering, his voice rising, battling the encroaching darkness. The air grew impossibly hot, then chillingly cold in rapid succession, as if the very elements were at war.
Suddenly, the Bible Michael held in his hand, an old, leather-bound volume, began to smoke. A faint smell of burning parchment filled the air, yet there was no flame, no spark, nothing to ignite the pages. The smoke curled from the holy book, a silent, impossible defiance of the physical laws. Michael almost dropped it, but Hale's sharp glance, his silent warning, steadied him. And then, the voice. It wasn't the chorus of whispers, nor the guttural snarls. It was a single voice, clear and distinct, that cut through the demonic cacophony, a voice that stopped Michael's breath in his throat. It was the voice of Emily's dead mother, warm, loving, filled with a mournful tenderness, as if she were speaking directly to him, begging him to stop. "Michael," the voice sighed, a gentle caress in the desolate space. "Why do you fight? Why do you hurt my child? This is not evil. This is just peace. She wants to be with me. Let her come. Let me have her back." Tears welled in Michael's eyes.
The voice was so real, so convincing, so perfectly crafted to exploit his empathy, his desire to alleviate suffering. It was Ariel's true power, not in violence, but in deception, in unraveling the very threads of compassion and faith. He felt a profound yearning to believe the voice, to lay down his arms, to allow Emily the peace her mother promised. He wavered, his conviction flickering like the lantern flame. "Silence, tempter!" Father Hale roared, his voice cracking, but his will unyielding. He splashed a torrent of holy water towards the source of the voice, the droplets hissing as they met the unseen presence. The tender voice vanished, replaced by a low, vibrating growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. The air grew cold again,
thick with a malevolent presence. Then Ariel spoke, not through a chorus, not through a stolen voice, but directly, its ancient power thrumming through the very stone, echoing in their minds.
You believe you sealed me, Ariel rumbled, its voice deep the ancient, resonating with a terrifying power. You believe your faith is my prison, but you are wrong, little priests, so very, very wrong. Not the chains, not the seals, not the holy words, none of it truly held me. Your faith did not imprison me. No. The voice swelled, filling the cavern with its chilling truth, making the very air vibrate with its terrifying revelation. It was your doubt. It was your fear. It was your unbelief that gave me strength. Your faith did not lock me away. It was your lack of it. It was your failing trust that created this cage. And now, your doubt has set me free. Ariel's words, a chilling revelation that inverted everything Michael had believed, struck him with the force of a physical blow. Your doubt has set me free. It was a truth so insidious, so fundamentally corrosive to faith, that it threatened to shatter the very core of his being.
The whispers, which had momentarily subsided, now surged back with renewed ferocity, a triumphant chorus of damnation, confirming Ariel's terrifying claim. Michael staggered, his grip on the crucifix weakening, his mind reeling from the profound paradox. If their doubt empowered it, then every flicker of fear, every rational questioning, every moment of human frailty had been a key turning in its lock, not a bolt holding it fast. Father Hale, though visibly shaken by Ariel's pronouncement, stood firm. His eyes, though filled with unspeakable sorrow, burned with an unyielding resolve. "Silence, liar!" Hale thundered, his voice hoarse, but imbued with a desperate final authority. "Your lies are as old as time. We fight in God's name, and His grace will prevail." He raised his own crucifix, its silver gleam piercing the gloom, and began a desperate, fervent prayer of binding, his voice rising in volume, challenging Ariel directly.
The demon responded with a furious roar, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The inverted crosses on the walls glowed with an unholy light, and the very stones of the basement floor began to tremble violently. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling, threatening to bury them. The air grew impossibly heavy, crushing, as if the entire weight of the church above them was pressing down. Michael felt himself teetering on the edge of despair, his faith wavering precariously. The tempting voice of Emily's mother returned, waving through the chaos, promising peace, promising an end to the struggle. He saw Emily's face in his mind, her innocent features twisted by the demon, and a surge of protective fury, a raw human love ignited within him. It wasn't theological certainty or intellectual conviction, but a simple, desperate need to save a child, and in that moment, a new, unshakable resolve bloomed in his heart.
If doubt fueled Ariel, then unwavering, sacrificial love would be its poison. He looked at Father Hale, his old mentor, whose face was now contorted in pain and exhaustion, yet still defiant. Hale was weakening, the decades of burden, the physical toll of his past failure, too great. Michael knew, with a sudden, terrible clarity, what he had to do. He had to be the final seal, the ultimate act of faith,
one that left no room for doubt. "Father Hale!" Michael shouted over the din, his voice surprisingly strong, resonating with a newfound authority. "Continue the binding prayer. Concentrate on the anchor." Hale, his eyes meeting Michael's, seemed to understand immediately. A flicker of recognition, a terrible knowing passed between them. The old priest nodded slowly, his lips moving faster, the ancient words of the ritual pouring from him with renewed intensity. Michael stepped forward, towards the glowing, pulsating anchor in the lull, the very heart of Ariel's prison.
He raised his crucifix, not as a weapon, but as a testament. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the clamor of the demon, the shaking of the earth, the whispers of doubt all fade away. He focused on Emily, on Agnes, on the people of the town, on the simple, pure love that existed in the world, the love that was stronger than any doubt. Then he opened his eyes, and they burned with a fierce, absolute conviction. "Ariel," he roared, his voice cutting through the demonic chaos, startling even the ancient entity. "You feed on doubt? Then let my faith be your final cage. Let my unwavering belief be the lock you cannot break." He took another step, then another, pushing through the oppressive force towards the anchor. Father Hale's binding prayer reached a crescendo, the Latin words reverberating with power. The demon shrieked in fury, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and terror, realizing Michael's intent.
It threw all its might against him, battering him with waves of psychic force, tempting him with visions of paradise, then plunging him into abyssal despair, trying to find a single crack in his resolve. But Michael held firm. "I am a servant of God," Michael declared, his voice unwavering, even as the demon's power tried to rip him apart. "And I offer myself, my soul, my very being, to be the final seal, to imprison you for eternity." With a final desperate surge of will, he lunged forward, pressing his crucifix directly against the pulsating dark glow of the anchor. A searing pain, both physical and spiritual, tore through him, as if he were being consumed by pure fire and ice simultaneously. He felt Ariel's ancient, furious consciousness trying to overwhelm him, to possess him, to twist his sacrifice into a new victory. But Michael fought back, not with prayers alone, but with a pure, unblemished act of self-annihilation, of complete surrender to his purpose. "Bind me!"
Michael screamed, his voice strained with unimaginable agony. "Bind me to this prison! Let my soul be the lock! Let my faith be the seal! For Emily! For the innocent! For God!" Father Hale, tears streaming down his face, finished the final words of the binding ritual, his voice breaking with grief, but his will unwavering. A flash of blinding white light erupting from the anchor, encompassing Michael completely. A primal, horrifying scream tore through the basement, not from Michael, but from Ariel, a scream of ultimate defeat and rage, as if it were being torn asunder, violently ripped from its grasp on freedom. The light post once, twice, then collapsed inward, along with Michael, into the stone anchor. The shaking stopped, the screams died, the whispers vanished. The inverted crosses on the wall slowly, agonizingly, rotated back to their upright positions.
The scent of sulfur and decay dissipate, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone and something akin to a fresh, clean rain. The basement, though still dark and ancient, was suddenly, profoundly silent. Father Hale staggered forward, his old hands reaching out, but there was nothing there. The anchor, where Michael had stood, was now just cold, hard stone, the faint glow extinguished. He fell to his knees, his face buried in his hands, tears racking his frail body. He knew. Michael O'Connor, the skeptical theologian, had performed the ultimate act of faith, sacrificing his own soul to become the final, unbreakable seal, the living, breathing lock on Ariel's prison. Agnes, peering down from above, a silent sentinel, saw the shift. She saw the light fade, the silence descend. She saw Father Hale weeping on the basement floor. She knew without being told the terrible, beautiful cost of their victory. Days later, the church was quiet.
Emily Carter, pale but lucid, remembered nothing of her ordeal. She returned to her grandmother, a quiet, shy girl once more, untouched by the shadows that had nearly claimed her. Father Hale, his purpose fulfilled, left St. Mary's without a word, disappearing back into the obscurity from which he came. And St. Mary's continued its silent vigil. The town, oblivious to the true nature of its protector, continued its quiet life. The bells of St. Mary's still rang every night at precisely 3:17 a.m., not with the mournful, oppressive clang they once carried, but with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate with a powerful, hidden energy. And under the church, beneath the cold stone floor, in the heart of the sealed basement, where a new living anchor had been forged, something began to pray. Not the ancient, malevolent whispers of Ariel, but a new, soft, ceaseless prayer.
A human prayer, eternal and unwavering, keeping watch, keeping the silence, keeping the world safe from the demon below. Michael O'Connor's prayer.